There's so much conversation these days about money and wealth and riches in our economy. In light of our recession, it's just part of the conversation of our lives. There's so many financial institutions, much like this bank here, that are struggling, people trying to make sense of what's happening. It reminds me of an experience I had with my children when I was trying to teach them about money and wealth and riches. We lived in a small home in Fort Myers, Florida. We just moved there and didn't really know much about the area, but another couple had invited us to come over to their house for dinner and to go swimming. And so we thought, this is going to be great. It's a chance for our kids to make some friends, and we'll enjoy being with them. So we get in our car and we start driving towards their house. And the closer we get to the address that I've been given, I'm following the directions, I notice the houses are kind of getting bigger and the neighborhoods are getting nicer. And finally, we pull onto their street, and these houses aren't just big, these are mansions. And of course, the home that we're going to winds up being at the very end of the block, and it's this enormous mansion with a covered, screened-in pool. And of course, our kids get out of the car and they act like they've never seen anything like this before in their life. And you know how sometimes your children say things that you kind of wish they wouldn't. They go in the house and this family greets us and they're so nice. But when they go in the house, our kids start going, "Dad, have you ever seen a room this big before? Dad, have you ever seen a television that size? Dad, you know, our house is an outhouse compared to that." And they didn't say the last one, but that's kind of how I felt. I mean, they just were going on and on. Well, we enjoy our time there. We have a great evening, great time swimming. We get in the car to go home, and the conversation continues. And one of my children says, "Dad, is Mr. Jones rich?" And so I'm thinking to myself, as a parent, I'm thinking, what a great teaching opportunity. And I said, "Well, you know, I suppose in some ways he's rich," but I said, "You know, son, I think our family is rich. We're rich in relationships and love for God." And I was trying to teach him all those things, and there's a long pause in the back seat, and he says, "You know, Dad, I think I'd like to try to be rich like the Joneses." And I have to confess, there was a part of me that thought, you know, I would too. There's so much today that revolves around money and wealth and riches. So let me ask you today, what's your perspective on that? Because there are a lot of opinions about how we should view money and riches. There are some who would say that you really can't follow God and be wealthy. There are some who would say that if you follow God and you're obedient, God's going to make you wealthy. So what is your perspective on wealth and riches? And from a spiritual understanding, how are we to view that and understand it? I want us to look today at a passage in Philippians chapter 4 where Paul is writing this letter, and he's received an offering. There's some churches who have collected some money and they've sent it to him, and he's very pleased to receive it. But he's writing this letter to a Philippian church that, much like you and I, sometimes they got a little obsessed with their money and their things and their stuff, and they didn't have the proper perspective on how to understand it in light of their relationship with God. And so Paul takes the occasion where he's receiving this gift, and he says in chapter 4, verse 11, he says, "Boy, I'm glad that you've cared for me by giving me this offering, but let me also help you understand a few things. Let me help you understand how I see this in the larger context of my life."